90.3 WHPC now presents Law You Should Know. The law affects every aspect of our lives, our home, our jobs, and our recreational activities. Now, learn about the law and how to protect yourself against the loss of your liberty or property, and learn how to stand up for your rights and seek compensation when you have been wronged. Your host for Law You Should Know is attorney Kenneth J. Landau, a past dean of the Nassau Academy of Law, and frequently lectures to lawyers on ethics and avoiding problems with clients, and to the public on how to choose and use lawyers. This is Law You Should Know on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome to Law You Should Know. Our special guest today is Mehran Ebadolahi, and he is the CEO of TestMax, a law LSAT prep company, and he's also a graduate of Harvard Law School. Mehran, welcome to Law You Should Know.
Thank you so much for having me.
What is your idea behind TestMax? What is your goal in this LSAT preparation course?
So in addition to doing LSAT prep, we also do bar exam prep. And that's actually how the company started with Bar Max. LSAT Max was our second course. But the idea is, for the first time using technology to realign the test prep space from the perspective of the user. Even before coronavirus, we had issues with the traditional in-class model for a number of reasons. And our vision is to use mobile technology, the latest technologies, to make a more convenient, more personalized, more affordable, and more effective test prep experience. And I'm thrilled to report that Bar Max and LSAT Max are the number one rated and most downloaded apps for the bar exam and LSAT, respectively, in the Apple App Store.
And they've evolved along with the traditional law school education. And I should mention to our listeners, the LSAT is a test to take before going into law school, like the SAT is for colleges. And after completing law school, in most states, a graduate has to take the bar exam and pass it before being admitted as a lawyer. How has the situation with COVID-19 affected law school test prep and admission policies and also law school education?
So, I think, in terms of the prep perspective, I think it depends on the provider. For us, it's been a very seamless transition because we've been doing everything remotely, whether it's the course or even private tutoring, we do it remotely. I think, in terms of the exams, I think LSAT has had a better response to the situation, or a faster response. So the March LSAT was canceled, the April LSAT was canceled, the June LSAT, the July LSAT, the August LSAT, all the in-person versions. But in response, LSAC announced LSAT Flex, which is a take-at-home LSAT, remotely proctored, using a computer, different from the traditional LSAT in that it's shorter, 3 sections instead of 5, but still gives students an opportunity to take the exam, get a score, and continue to apply to law schools, which I'm sure law schools are very appreciative of. In the bar exam space, it has been a lot less certain, and currently we still have a lot of questions. A lot of jurisdictions are talking about doing remote exams, but everything's still in the air. There were some jurisdictions who were actually planning in-person July bar exams. So, in addition to that, they announced 2 more bar exams in September. And then they announced a 4th one, which is an online-only version in case jurisdictions can't hold in-person bar exams. And so that's where we are from that perspective.
And usually for bar exams, there's one portion that is state-specific, and then the other portion is more of a nationwide bar exam.
And I think that's probably the issue that you're seeing. It's not completely at the discretion of the jurisdictions. Now, you're seeing some jurisdictions say, hey, we're going to create something completely different. It's going to be a different exam. We're not going to rely on any MBE questions, which is the federal portion. But I would imagine, that's partly the October online exam that the National Conference of Bar Exam has announced, which is going to be, their typical federal portions, whether it's the multiple choice, the essays, and the performance test. And so I would imagine that, the National Conference of Bar Examiners is looking very closely at the ability to offer that federal portion remotely. But I think what makes it trickier than the LSAT is then you have another component of it that's obviously provided by another institution. So I think coordinating that is a little bit more challenging.
And the LSAT score, aside from determining what type of, what level or what ranking law school person may be admitted to, might affect the financial assistance they're giving or even obtaining a full or partial scholarship. What advice would you have someone, aside from taking your course and preparing with your help, what advice would you have for a college student or someone who's thinking of a law as a legal career, what courses to take in college, and what they can do on their own to prepare for the bar exam and for law school?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the LSAT is not only the number one factor in law school admissions, it's also the number one factor in merit-based scholarships for the schools that obviously offer merit-based scholarships. Harvard Law School has no merit-based aid. It's all need-based. But I think in terms of preparing for the exam, I think the key, and, one of the reasons that, a lot of students look at our program compared to our competitors. And, I'm from the world of, I borrowed $1,500 to pay for a 10-week in-class LSAT prep course that put me nowhere near my target score. And I think the reason for that is the LSAT is a unique exam. It's not a subject-based exam. It's testing a way of thinking. It's trying to see, can you think critically? Do you understand the rules of formal logic? And because it's testing a way of thinking, that process can take longer than a traditional subject-based exam, which most people are aware of with the SAT, ACT. Those are subject-based. Bar exam is subject-based, right? And so I think the most important thing as students consider LSAT prep is get out of this idea that you should prepare for 8-10 weeks. That idea came from in-class courses that had a benefit of recharging you when you weren't ready. The reason we offer lifetime access is not because we think you should prepare for the rest of your life. We think that as the most important factor in law school admissions, you should spend more than 10 weeks on it. If you compare your undergraduate GPA, which you spend 4 years on, maybe 20-30% of your application, and that's the thing. And if you look at it from that perspective and put in the time, I think you'll see great results.
And so you want to hone different skills that may help you in college as well as in giving you a higher score on your LSAT.
Well, absolutely. So I think, the benefit of the LSAT, when you approach it properly and you teach it properly, not with the gimmicks and the tricks, but teaching formal logic, that type of critical thought is obviously invaluable as a law student, but also as a practicing attorney and actually as a citizen of the world, right? So I think, as you look at my experience, it completely changed the way I think in a way that has been, extremely beneficial. And I think that happens for a lot of students.
So your approach to the bar exam prep is a little bit different. Do you think a student should be studying for that throughout law school or just in the months after graduation before they sit for the bar exam?
I think, historically for traditional students, I think, once you graduate, setting aside those 2-3 months is generally sufficient as a subject-based exam. I think, what we see in terms of the lifetime access in the bar exam space is not really your first-time graduating students, more second-time, new jurisdiction, where they might be working, have a job, or family obligations that prevent them from doing it in a typical short window. But yeah, I think as a subject-based exam, it's a very different approach. If you don't feel comfortable with legal writing, that's an issue that can take longer to address. And that obviously comes back to, hopefully the law school is instilling those correct principles during the education. But obviously that can vary from institution to institution.
And that's also something you can practice, prepare for throughout your college education and before you take the LSAT?
Well, I think, I've always been of the opinion that you should select your undergraduate major based on what you're interested in. I think, the skills that we need for the LSAT, you can be taught in an LSAT prep course. I think if you're interested in philosophy and as a standalone subject, great, but I wouldn't pick a major solely for the fact of, I think this is going to do or help me get accepted to law school. Law schools historically have been very open-minded when it comes to undergraduate majors.
Now, let's assume you've helped someone get into the law school of their choice. You've done some research and studies. Why are many law students, I believe it's as high as 31% of law and pre-law students, contemplating abandoning their legal education?
Yeah, so this is obviously coming from the survey that we conducted from our users, and I think it's a testament to what's happening with the coronavirus pandemic. Obviously we're seeing a forced transition online, and because it's a forced transition online and not really thought out, it leaves a lot to be desired, right? I think what we saw in the semester that just ended was online education became Zoom video conferencing, which is not really online education, right? For example, our bar exam prep course doesn't have any video. Until recently, we released office hours that are video, live video, and then on demand. But prior to that, every lecture was an audio lecture, and it was still extremely effective. So, I think what you're seeing is the disconnect between what they are getting in a remote setting and the tuition price. And I think, the disconnect is coming from, right now, as we transition to an online remote learning process and the tuition remaining the same. And obviously the only experience that they have is this experience that was a rapid deployment in an emergency scenario, right? But I think as we look to the fall, Harvard Law School in particular, we had Harvard Law School professor Ronald Sullivan join our podcast, The Legal Level, to chat about the transition to remote and how Harvard is re-examining the entire process and reinvesting in this remote learning so that it's much more than Zoom. And that, the hope is that with that, some of the experience kind of matches the price point. And I think that's kind of what you're seeing. And I think, another thing which I think is a long-term concern, yes. In the short term, I think they're going to make accommodations, is the ABA rule that prevents students who graduate from online law schools from sitting for the bar exam, which has historically prevented online law schools from really gaining traction outside of California.
Right. There are certainly going to be some dramatic changes as a result of COVID. I just want to remind our listeners that you're listening to Law You Should Know here on 90.3, the voice of Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York. And if you missed any portion of this show or you want to tell someone else about it, you can listen to the podcast at nccradio.org. As the CEO of TestMax, you also part of your survey was to find that law students and potential law students felt that a law education done remotely was vastly overpriced.
Well, yeah, and I think that there's a completely natural testament. I think, a lot of people don't realize that one of the highest margin business you'll find in the world is in-person education. And I think, as you look, one of the things that I've been saying is, why is it this moment that we are for the first time considering the benefits of remote distant learning? TestMax, for example, has been around for 10 years. And we've been arguing tooth and nail about the merits of remote distant learning, particularly in a standardized test prep space where there's literally no benefit of the community aspect. Being around stressed out students, you could argue, is a detriment, right? I understand that college and, graduate school, there's this networking, as somebody who went to Harvard Law School for the network, I completely understand that. But why is it that we've had this dichotomy of either you can come the traditional 4 years for undergrad, 3 years for law school, put everything on hold, or you can't come at all, instead of, okay, we have the traditional option for those students who have those luxuries, but the average college student today is 25, and a quarter of them have children. And so putting my life on hold to pursue higher education is not an option for me. If I had remote options, if I had remote law school, for example, and maybe I already had an undergrad degree and had a career that I was, somewhat happy with, but I was looking to see if I could improve my earning capacity and improve my station in life and provide better for my family. But because I don't have an option of a remote education that molds around my schedule, I'm basically taken out of the market.
And so your position is that law school education is uniquely suited to being taught in an online fashion. especially more so than medical school and maybe even more than traditional college, which some students look for that lifestyle experience. Because of the reasons you mentioned, there's no reason law school cannot be offered remotely online.
Particularly with a competency exam standing in between practicing attorneys and the general public, right? Because obviously the concern is we want competent attorneys, right? But we have that gatekeeper, we have the bar exam, right? And so, yes, I would say 100%. Even medical school, I think the issue with medical school right now is technology is not where it needs to be. I think it's starting to get there. If you think about AR and VR, you could even see a world where you're able to do a lot of that stuff remote, right? And so my point is, I think this is, obviously a crisis that has forced a lot of things that were happening to accelerate. But I think as we look forward, my hope is that we don't just use this moment to say, hey, coronavirus came and went and we were able to manage it and now we're back to what we were doing before. Hopefully this is a moment that we look at online education and see the benefits. And
that's certainly happening in college. So you believe it will and should reach the law school level?
I think it should happen, education across the board. Because when you look at, college, for example, I went to UCLA for undergrad, and UCLA, is obviously so proud of their acceptance rate, which is, I think they're rejecting 6 out of every 7 people that apply. And so think about that. This is an institution that's purpose is to provide undergraduate education to as many California residents as possible, right? That's why it started. And now we're proud that we're rejecting 6 of 7 applicants. And that's the thing, it's, why not have the traditional in-person option for those students who have that ability, but also give an option to students that leads to a credentialed degree. And I think that's the key. You already see with iTunes Academy, you have all of Stanford's classes online, all of Harvard's classes online, all of MIT's classes online. The problem is that when I go through that process, I don't get anything that I could then use as I go out on the job market and try to convince employers that I have these skill sets. And I think that's the hope with this moment is that, particularly given the importance of education, as a first-generation immigrant who was able to open the door of Harvard Law School and what came with that, I've seen it firsthand. And if we believe that education is the path to the middle class, we should be doing everything in our power to make quality education available and affordable to any student, regardless of financial situation, personal situation, that might prevent the traditional options.
And certainly business school and MBA degrees and other advanced graduate degrees are sometimes available on a remote basis, and they are accepted by the business community.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, I don't know where this idea comes from, except for obviously, I understand that in the 80s, early 90s, if you wanted to distribute content to people, your only option was to get people into a location and give it to them. That is not the world we live in. And we've heard the arguments that you can learn anything that you learn in college by going to the library, right? And I think that's true. I mean, as a subject-based curriculum, why can't I get that the way I get my binge Netflix shows?
And even on a live class, that can be handled, through different forums on the internet.
Yeah, and I think, but I think that's one of the things we should really consider. And you see with our competitors. Our competitors are moving to live online courses, which I find interesting. Why would I take the issue with the in-person course, right, teaching to the mean, moving at a pace that some students feel held back, other students feel left behind, and bring that to the online version, which doesn't have that issue, right? And I think if you look at what we do, our core curriculum is on demand with pause, rewind, rewatch, anytime. But then we supplement that with live office hours. So the core curriculum is given to students at a pace that works for them, but then you supplement that with the ability to interact with instructors, get clarification, and make personal progress.
And those two ingredients can also be part of a law school education.
Exactly. And I think, the one thing with law school that's a little bit unique is the Socratic method, and that engagement in terms of how that material is conveyed. It's not your traditional, let me explain the elements of a contract, right? It's a discourse, right, that happens between the professor and the student, right, that's supposed to not only give the law, but also instill a type of thinking and a thought process that hopefully remains as they move forward to practicing a term.
Right, but that can still be accomplished in a live Zoom meeting to some extent.
Exactly. I think the study group stuff and the personal interactions is where I think that's the part of it. Because think about the learning that goes on outside of the classroom, right? And not being on campus, not being able to, meet at the library. Obviously there's technology to deal with that as well. And I think that's what they need to really start to flush out, because that's what students are going to feel like they're missing out on the most. Not getting the content. It's the engagement with the classmates, study group discussions, and the like.
But since the current generation is used to doing everything online anyway, that shouldn't be a problem. I'd just like to remind our listeners, you're listening to Law You Should Know on 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York. You're listening to Law You Should Know. If you missed any portion of this program or want to tell someone else about it, you can go to nccradio.org. We're talking with the CEO of TestMax, and just tell us how someone can find out more about your organization, how you prepare people for the LSAT, and also the bar exam, and more information on a legal career.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously you can go to our website, which is testmaxprep.com. But you can also download any of our apps for free by going into the App Store and searching Bar Max. That is our bar exam course. LSAT Max is our LSAT prep course. 1L is our first year law school supplement. And then we also have a course or a study buddy product for the GRE called GRE Max. And those are all available to download for free.
As far as the decline in college graduates applying to law school, do you think it's somewhat influenced by the decline in good feelings about becoming a lawyer, the unhappiness of lawyers, and the tremendous cost of a legal education?
Absolutely. I think it's a cost-benefit analysis that's taking place, and it has been taking place prior to coronavirus pandemic. Law school is 3 years of your life, $200,000 of somebody's money. And if you're borrowing that money, you would hope that the education you're receiving is going to give you the job prospects to repay that debt. And outside of the top law schools where you see the corporate jobs, I think it's a very fair concern to have about taking out that amount of debt and not having the job prospects to repay it. And again, I think that comes back to an online law school can be much more affordable than a traditional in-person education. And by being more affordable, I don't have that same debt burden, and I'm able to be, and I'm not crippled upon graduation or put in a position of, basically perpetual servitude, because those are the debts that you can never discharge.
So the road after law school may not be paved with gold for everyone. In fact, for most people.
I think, corporate law jobs, which is, the $200,000 a year straight out of law school are traditionally limited to the top schools. And I think that's another thing, as you think about online law schools, I think something that's also just as important that most low-rank law schools don't do, because they're so focused on the student passing the bar exam, is teaching them how to practice, how to go out after graduation and open up their own law firm and serve clients on their own. I think that would make it a lot easier for them to feel comfortable and positive about their ability post-graduation going out and earning a livelihood with that new degree.
What do you think law schools or lawyers can do to enhance the happiness of students while they're in law school and when they become lawyers?
Well, so I think one of the things, obviously, is the stress from the competition has been something that schools have been addressing. I think if you look back to the last time we had a crisis, which was the economic collapse of 2009, which was actually when I was a student at Harvard Law School, that was when Harvard Law School transitioned from grades to pass-fail. And part of that was because of the strained and stressed job market, making it easier for students to go out there and not be taken out of the market because they got a B+ instead of an A-, which was such an arbitrary distinction anyway. So I think that was a great move. And you're seeing that from the top schools a lot more now, moving to that pass-fail model. Obviously, I think as you go down the law school rankings, the problem is, private equity had moved into that space, and, there's a kind of accept anybody and then kick them out when they don't perform. And so that, I think, really makes that even worse, that stress. And so another thing to be aware of as you consider applying to law schools, as we always say, there's nothing wrong with going to a lower ranked law school, but there is something wrong with borrowing $200,000 to pay for that education. And so keep that in mind.
And around the country, there are some local and state public law schools which may have a lower price tag. And also sometimes financial aid is available, especially if you have good credentials and you're applying to a lower ranked law school. Absolutely.
In terms of the public schools, UCLA Law School, unfortunately, is very similarly priced to USC Law School. That's the sad reality. But you're right in terms of the merit-based scholarships, again, which are primarily based on your LSAT score. But something else I did want to mention is we just recently announced the Justice in Action program, where over the next 5 years we are planning to sponsor 1,000 students from underrepresented minorities throughout the whole journey, from LSAT prep to law school admissions counseling to law school supplements to bar exam prep course, all free of charge, as we try to break down some of these barriers that have historically prevented minority students from pursuing legal education. So if they're interested in that, please make sure you apply. You can find that information on our website, on our blog. It's called the Justice in Action program. We also just did a podcast on that.
Just tell us one more time about the other information that's available on your website.
Yeah, so again, from TestMax Prep, you can find out all the information about our bar exam course, our LSAT course, our private tutoring for both of those courses as well. You can also find our 1L supplement and our GRE product as well.
Can you just give us the website again for TestMax?
Yeah, it is TestMax Prep.
Okay, I'd like to thank the CEO of TestMax for being our guest on Law You Should Know. If you missed any portion of this program or you want to tell someone else about it, the podcast is available at nccradio.org. You're listening to Law You Should Know on 90.3 FM, the voice of Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York. Please tune in next week at the same time for another program on Law You Should Know.